Welcome to the Clear to Send podcast, a podcast about wireless engineering, where we educate you on Wi-Fi technology, talk about design tips, troubleshooting, interviews, and the tools. Here are your hosts, Rowell and François.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to a brand new episode of the Clear to Send podcast. I am Rowell Dionisio, joined by François Vergès. How are you, François?
I'm very good. How are you?
I'm doing very well. I'm actually excited about this episode because we are going to talk about troubleshooting Wi-Fi tips in the warehouse. So in a warehouse environment where it could be harsh, it could be very different. Actually, this is very different from an office environment. So we're going to talk about 6 troubleshooting tips. And those 6 tips, they're client care, client configurations, directional antennas, operating a Skyjack, hardware failures, and retry rates. So François, why don't you start us off with the client care portion and tell us your 6 tips in working in this.
Yeah, sure. So we try to think about, when we get called to troubleshoot the Wi-Fi in a warehouse and you arrive in the warehouse, what do you want to look out for? What do you want to check first and what are the common issues you find in warehouses? So the first one we listed there is, we call it client care. The Wi-Fi clients need more love. And by that we mean that the Wi-Fi devices themselves, sometimes in a warehouse environment, they're not handled, as carefully as they should be. They're usually rugged devices, so it doesn't matter too much. But sometimes you'll see mashed up devices, especially devices with external antennas, that might affect the connectivity, the Wi-Fi connectivity. Some example I've seen is usually they have little embedded computers in lift trucks with little antennas sticking out of the screens, and sometimes the antenna will be missing. And then when you ask the person why the antenna is missing, they'll tell you, we used it to hang our gloves or duct tape, and then one day it broke. And then you wonder why the Wi-Fi device is not working as good as it should. So some things like that should be looked at when you troubleshoot Wi-Fi in a warehouses. Try to look at the devices themselves, right? Try to ask the personnel if you can take a look at the devices. Sometimes you'll see right away that something is wrong. They also have sometimes phones. I've seen more and more Android phones, rugged Android phones, in the warehouses. So just try to take a look at how those devices are handled, and to see if you could have some potential hardware issues with the devices. Also, they tend to have a longer life cycle in warehouses devices, right? They don't replace them every 3 years or so on. So you might see older devices as well. The devices are used for years in a warehouse, and sometimes it doesn't age.
Yeah, they will keep using those devices because I have seen printers with Wi-Fi adapters, and some of those were just dangling off the printer because it got their mobile printers, so they got hit or something, or even laptops have been dropped. So I've seen really dented laptops that could have damaged the Wi-Fi adapter. I don't know. So yeah, you do need to look at these devices physically and then test them as well to make sure they still work.
And I mean, it's just the environment, right? Any Wi-Fi engineer who worked in a warehouse know that you don't have anyone to put your laptop, right? So when you do a survey, like you end up putting your laptop on the floor, or you end up putting your laptop on boxes or whatever. Yeah. Whatever you find around you. So, I mean, that's just the nature of the environment. So that's just something you want to keep in mind. That takes us a little bit outside of our Wi-Fi bubble, APs, and infrastructure. But that's something we need to keep in mind when we troubleshoot warehouses. The second one is client configuration. So it's still related to the clients, right? We love our clients. So the configuration is sometimes you would want to check specific features on the client configuration side. Most of the devices used in warehouses, they have a little, network application where you can set the SSID you want to connect to. You can set the security, the password, or the credentials if you're using .1x or anything like that. And they also allow you to change some settings. The one I've changed most often is the roaming trigger, roaming thresholds. They have different names depending on the application, and that can help you. That can help your clients to have a better experience over the Wi-Fi. And when I change those features, I always want to do a lot of testing on the floor to make sure that the changes I'm doing has a positive impact on the Wi-Fi connectivity. But that's something that I look for, especially after I do I usually do a survey first to get an idea of how the RF environment is. And then I get to understand if I have a lot of APs, a few APs, and I can take better decisions into how I want to adjust these settings. You also want to look out for which type of applications they're using, right? Is it a very sensitive real-time application? Is it like a database update, or is it like a telnet session that's very sensitive to timeouts? So you want to look out for these features when you change those settings, and you want to test.
You'll see those devices reconnecting back, right? So once if they didn't roam properly, or they went out of range with coverage, that application will either fail pretty poorly, or having to reconnect back to that database. And I've seen things like transactions that don't go all the way through to the database, but the application thinks it has sent it already. So you'll see like some inconsistencies. So, and that depends on the application too. So it's not every application that does that, but it's very finicky applications that have to do with packing and using scanner guns, etc. So
sometimes in warehouses you can see very old applications used, and that are very sensitive to network latency and timeouts, right? Mm-hmm. So sometimes they don't play as well with some old telnet applications. Some other settings you can change is, the 2.4 versus 5 radio. If you have the luxury of having dual band clients, you can decide to have them connecting on 5 gig only. Let's say you have a healthy 5 gig environment, and you think you'll have a better experience over 5 gig. You can choose to have those clients connect on 5 gig only. So that's something I've done too in the past. Other settings you can check. And something that goes along with configuration is also the firmware version of the Wi-Fi driver. That's probably the first thing we should have mentioned, but we try to find other tips here. This is the one you will hear most often when you talk about client devices in warehouses. The firmware. Usually the firmware versions of all these devices are all over the place. It's never the same. And so you want to have, first of all, you want to update them, and you want to have all the devices using the same firmware. Mm-hmm. So it's just easier for everyone to handle, manage, troubleshoot, monitor.
And have something consistent too. So if there's one version that is known to work in that environment very well, then that's the version you want those devices to run. And then as newer versions come out, you'll test that against your baseline of known good firmware versions, so that way you know as you upgrade which ones you should upgrade to.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So once you do an update, you want to test once again, make sure that it works well. Most of the time it works better than before, because you end up, they end up using firmware versions that dated from like 5-10 years ago. Maybe not 10, but a long time ago. Mm-hmm. And so usually when you update it, it works better than it used to.
It should be.
Yeah. It's not always easy to update those type of devices. But you can rely on your customers usually to do it. Or they usually have like a team of, that's usually what I tend to do. They usually have a team of IT people that would do it for you. You just have to tell them which firmware version to use. That would be your job to figure out which one to use, and then they can go and download it and upload it onto the devices. And I think I've done it once. I've had to do it once, but that's not necessarily something I enjoy doing. So and I'm good. I'm better at other things. So So talking about the client, we talked about. Yeah.
No, good. Is there anything else you want to say to clients about client configurations before we move on to the third tip?
We'll talk about clients again for the last the last tip. Meanwhile, we'll move to the infrastructure.
All right. So our third tip here is directional antennas. And I'm a big fan of using directional antennas, especially when it comes to warehouse. So why don't you tell everyone why directional antennas is here as a troubleshooting Wi-Fi tip?
Yeah. I was trying to find an analogy for directional antennas, and I think it's kind of like the iPhone. When you don't have an iPhone, you don't really, especially at the beginning, you don't really see why you should have an iPhone. And as soon as you have an iPhone, you can't go back. It's kind of like the same with directional antenna. When when you don't use it, you're like, it works fine with my Omnis. And then when you start using them, you're like, oh my gosh, it's amazing. I need to use them more and more.
So much better. Yeah.
Yeah. So directional antennas, I think they're underused in warehouses, and sometimes if they're used, they're not used properly. So directional antennas here would be two things. First of all, check if they're used or not, and if they're used, are they used properly, right? Right, everything is in the name, right? Directional antenna. So the signal will be directed somewhere. So if you don't install this directional antenna properly, you're pretty much shooting yourself in the foot, right? So you have better control over the RF, but you need to be able to control it. Does it make sense?
Yeah, you have to know the beam widths, the gain on those antennas, and make sure that nothing blocks the signal when you're shooting it down to the floor. Because I have seen racks that just get put up, and they get put up in alignment to the directional antenna. So basically, it's just shooting it straight down towards whatever's being stored on the racks.
Yeah, exactly. So you'll see some stuff like that. Also, what I've seen with directional antenna, with directional antenna comes RF cables. Sometimes you'll see very long RF cable extensions that will introduce some loss. And there's also something specific to how you handle these RF cables. You cannot curve it too much. It's kind of like a fiber. So you have to look out for those things. And sometimes those RF cables are not even connected to the AP. They're just hanging there in the ceiling. I've seen that. And then they wonder why the signal is not good on the floor. So a couple of things like that you have to look out for. Sometimes if it's just the stick antennas that you can change the angle, sometimes they're not directed to the right direction. If you have multiples, if you have like 4 or 6, sometimes they're not installed properly. We've seen that many times on badfire.com.
And why don't we talk about how directional antennas can fix an issue where you have omnidirectional antennas? Because as you're troubleshooting Wi-Fi in a warehouse, omnidirectional, as you know, just gets propagated everywhere.
Yeah.
But the biggest thing here is these APs are way up there in the ceiling. You're talking about over 30 feet sometimes or more.
Yeah.
When it comes to placing those APs.
Yeah, so 2 things. First thing is that obviously, so it's omnidirectional, it's high in the ceiling, so you're not going to have as much energy going to the floor. The energy will pretty much go everywhere. So you might still have pretty good signal on the floor, but it's going everywhere. So you're gonna have more channel overlap, right? And then depending on what you have in your environment, if you have rackings with stock going in and out, your RF environment will change if you're using omnidirectional, depending on what you have on your rackings, right? And that could affect your Wi-Fi network.
Yeah, because I've been in a warehouse environment where they used omnidirectional antennas. The ceiling, they were mounted maybe 30 to 40 feet high, but within the racks, they stored a lot of metal material. So like refrigerators, ovens, that kind of thing. And so they had problems where certain aisles, they just weren't getting any signal. And if you look at it, it's because there's large refrigerators there in the racks, and it was just not going through. So it's one reason why I recommend directional antennas, especially in that type of environment. If you know the materials in the racks, then that'll be key to your design and implementation.
Something else that I talk about with the omnidirectional antenna is that customer will tell me, "Oh, I've installed omnidirectional antennas. I know the ceiling is high, but don't worry, I've installed high gain omnidirectional antenna." But when you're talking about high gain omnidirectional antenna, you actually
makes it narrow.
You're making the signal going more sideways than down, so you're actually making the situation worse. Yeah,
that's a good one. That's actually knowing what happens when you have high gain antennas, but what type of antennas is that?
Yeah. And I think it's so using directional antenna, because you need to understand what you're doing, will also force you to study the patterns, understand how they work and everything.
Yep. Awesome.
Yeah. I had another analogy there, but I was going to say it's kind of like when you become vegan, you have to check all the ingredients on the food that you're eating. So you're making sure you're not eating any milk or eggs or whatever. But you end up better understanding what you're eating. So it's kind of like the same.
No, yeah, that's exactly right. Because as you learn more about what solutions you're putting out there, you really got to understand RF, the characteristics, even the materials that are in the environment. I mean, this really helps, especially where warehouse are using, like when we went back to clients and client care. Some of these devices aren't very new. They're older devices, so a lot of them don't do well with multipath, or don't do well when there's any kind of latency or loss of connectivity.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So since we talked about directional antennas and their high ceilings, you have this next tip here that is very different, and it's not very technical, but it's operating a skyjack. Can you go into that?
Yeah, operating a skyjack. So, how do you might ask us, how do we validate these APs installation and so on? We have to go under the ceiling and I don't have a 30-foot ladder or something like that. Well, usually you'll use a skyjack. Most of the times I already have a skyjack in the warehouse to change things like light bulbs or for any electrical work. So you could ask them to borrow it. Obviously you need the license for it. You could get a license online by just following like an online course. But what I would recommend is to also do like a training with an instructor, where you can spend. It's kind of like when you learn how to drive a car. They teach you how to handle the skyjack. And it's just going to make you feel more comfortable when you go in and do actual work. Because what you have to be careful how you handle the skyjack, not damaging any equipment they would have in the warehouse. You also have to understand that you're not alone in the warehouse, so you have to play nice with the workers. And working with skyjack, especially if you're going up high in the under the ceiling, you need to understand. You need to be trained, right? Understand how the stability works, what you can do when the platform is raised, and all of these things.
Yeah,
and
safety training.
Safety training. and then sometimes you might have to use this skyjack outdoor as well. And outdoor you have winds and you have other elements that comes into play. So safety training would be important for the skyjack. So that's why I added the tip there. You're not going to need the skyjack all the time, but you might need it.
Be prepared just in case you need to use it.
Exactly, be prepared. And then when you need usually need a hard hat and help me there, Rowell, the safety equipment you put on to secure yourself to the platform. No, it's like a
harness.
Harness. Thank you. You need your harness as well, right? So if you start to do more and more Wi-Fi work in warehouses, there's a list of equipment you should carry with you. Obviously, safety vest, safety glasses, earplugs, boots. Obviously, safety boots, and then a harness if you're planning on using. Yeah, steel toe boots. And maybe we can do a list for you guys. I also always carry duct tape with me. Never know.
Okay.
But yeah, and then so you use the skyjack if you
tie someone up and shut their mouth, right?
ORM doesn't work. ORM doesn't work. No, so you would use a skyjack if you want to double check AP installations, and also if we're talking more about the design phase, you can use the skyjack for your AP on the stick measurements. Okay. The beauty of it is that you can raise it from the floor, so you can just you can work alone pretty much. You install the AP on the skyjack, and then you raise it up, and then you walk around.
Okay. All right. So why don't we go into the next tip, which is the hardware failures, because we will be in harsh environments a lot of the time in warehouses. Yeah. So why don't you go into that?
Yeah. So depending on the warehouse you're working with, it might be a plant. It might be indoor, outdoor, depending on where you live as well, right? It might be an open warehouse. What I mean by open warehouse is like you don't have any walls, so you just have a ceiling structure. And so you might have, a lot of dust. You might have temperature changes drastically between summer and winter. And so this will impact the equipment if you're not using the proper equipment, if you don't have any enclosures. If you just, sometimes the companies will just use the same type of APs as they use indoor, and not thinking that, in the summer under the roofs, the temperature can be very hot and impact the how the equipment is operating. So all the things you might have to keep in mind. When I think about those harsh environments, I always think about the episode that Brennan did with Keith, and they talked about mine, the Wi-Fi in the mines, and he's like, there's always, sometimes you cannot see the AP because it's under a pile of dust. So it's not, it's never been that hard for me, but you're definitely going to see some dust and different elements that might impact how the hardware is working. So you might want to look out for that as well. And so we're talking about the APs, but also like the switches and maybe the client devices.
So make sure you have the right enclosures. If you have to have the equipment there on the floor somewhere, it's got to be like a NEMA enclosure.
Yeah, sometimes they put the switches in cabinets, but sometimes it's like improvised cabinets, like made of wood, and and the Spidey
Make sure you have
cables
ventilation
and so on. So yeah,
cool. Yeah, so that one's pretty straightforward then when it comes to hardware failures. But again, it's some people don't realize about the environmentals there in the warehouse, and depending on how it is, even if it's a freezer, you got to be prepared to make sure that device can operate in those temperatures.
Exactly. And then I've never used one myself, but I've seen customer using temperature sensors to validate the temperature. Like, especially I was troubleshooting an issue like where an AP would heat up under a ceiling during the summer, and then they use this tool to measure the temperature under the ceiling. And
you're talking about those laser temperature?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
So that can be
I've seen
useful in some environments if it's too hot, too cold. And then trying to see also if it's outdoor equipment. Sometimes you have outdoor equipment in warehouses. If you have like heavy wind or freezing rain, things like that, that would add up like a centimeter of ice on your equipment. So those type of stuff melts away, but you can also double check that it doesn't break anything.
Yeah, definitely. All right, so then that brings us to our last tip, which is retry rate. What did you have in mind here as far as troubleshooting Wi-Fi in a warehouse?
So retry rate. Yeah, I put this one because I've seen environments where in warehouses they would use legacy clients like 11BG that don't handle multipath very well, and then in an environment where you have a lot of racking, the signal gets reflected a lot. If you have multipath, the clients cannot handle it, and so you're gonna end up with a lot of retries. And the retry rate can be pretty high. I've seen retry rate up to like 50%, something like that.
Wow.
And that's not helping the, we both know that retries are bad in a Wi-Fi environment. It's not helping the overall user experience. And so you want to try to see how you can minimize that. I always advise the clients to use, newer equipment that support MIMO at least. And then also maybe change the AP locations, maybe add a couple APs if need be, maybe change the type of antennas, use directional antennas, and then try to see how it's impacting your retry rates.
Okay.
If you don't have a lot of, real-time applications, you might not see that a lot. You might not see the impact of that a lot, but if it's there and you can minimize it, it's why not?
Cool. Well, I think these were great tips because it's been a while since I've handled a warehouse environment, and I think that was back in the end days, and that's when I was troubleshooting the omnidirectional stuff. But I have been in a lot of warehouses and taking a look at how Wi-Fi installations were, and I'll definitely look at what kind of clients they're using. I see a lot of wireless printers, and fortunately, I'm actually seeing. I saw a client, a scanner gun that was using. What are they? They're not the iPhones, but the iPods, the touchscreen iPods. So they put them. They put them into touch. This. Yeah, they put them into a scanner retrofit
body.
Yeah, a scanner body, and they use that for all their packing and scanning. And I think that's much better because those devices have better Wi-Fi adapters on them, and plus you have that Cisco Apple partnership, so you can try to leverage that. But I think as more warehouse environments really start understanding that Wi-Fi is key to their operations, especially when it comes to shipping things out efficiently, right? You're getting the product off of the shelves and into the truck as fast as possible. That's going to be key for when they have competitors. So I can see Wi-Fi being an advantage over another competitor who has a bad Wi-Fi installation.
Yeah, and in warehouses too, it can impact the production a lot if the Wi-Fi is not working properly. I've seen one day I went to do a troubleshooting in a warehouse, and the customer was telling me we're having the issue for 2 years now. I'm about to quit my job.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they were just like fed up,
That's drastic, quitting your job.
Well, she was the manager for the warehouse, and she was getting a lot of pressure from management because they couldn't meet their production targets, right?
Okay.
And she was just, getting fed up. So it can also impact the production. And I guess that's something we can keep in mind. It gives us a purpose, right, in our job.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing those tips. Again, those 6 troubleshooting tips in the warehouse is client care, client configurations, directional antennas, operating a Skyjack, hardware failures, and retry rates. So do you want to add anything else before we end the show, Francois?
No, if people are interested in more warehouse, Wi-Fi things, we already did an episode maybe a year ago now.
Yeah, it's been a while.
Glenn Kate and myself did a presentation at WLPC this year, so you can find it on YouTube. If you type warehouse Wi-Fi WLPC 2018, I think you'll find.
We'll link out to that in the show notes.
Yeah, and then we also did a webinar with Ekao on warehouse Wi-Fi. So if you want to learn a little bit more how you could design those warehouse environments in Ekao, we give a couple of examples.
Cool. Well, I want to thank you for sharing your tips and sharing out those links. We'll definitely put that into the show notes. And if you guys have any questions for Francois and the tips he has, or if you want to add in your own tips, head over to the show notes. This one's going to be cleartosend.net/120. And you can also hit us up on Twitter @cleartosend. And it's an interesting environment. It's very different from your typical office environments, but it's important because that's how we get our products shipped to our houses, right? And warehouses involved, and Wi-Fi is critical.
Exactly.
So once again, I want to thank you guys for listening to this episode, and we will see you next time. Thanks, guys.
See you guys. Bye-bye.